So this is the Secret Wars #1 cover and poster art by Mike Zeck. Um, Obviously, Marvel has the whole new Secret Wars thing going on, which has been funny because this is sort of a very much homage cover. Lots of people doing their version of this thing. Um, and I go back and I read the original Secret Wars, and boy, you can pick holes in it, but it's still just a really great story. And at the time, it just seemed like, mind melting. Like, oh my God, all these heroes on Battle World with the villains. And, again, it's sort of, you can read it now and go, whatever. But, this was such a striking piece of art. And one day at San Diego, Albert Moy pulled it out of his collection and put it up. And it definitely was one of those pieces. And we sort of talked a lot about this as sort of, is it a piece you have to have? And so at the time, if Mike Zeck was selling for X, this was 2X. You know what I mean? It was one of those pieces. I'm not talking $100,000 or anything like that, but again, within the period, Albert definitely was breaking it out and kind of going past the barrier. If the most expensive Zeck piece is ever sold for $10,000, this is going to be $20,000. And a good friend of mine, Chuck Costas, is a huge Zeck collector, and even he was just sort of, oh my God, that's too expensive. This was one for me where the number didn't matter, especially at the time, especially where we were, and I had to get it. And I grabbed it and I bought it. And I think to this day, Albert regrets either, at least, if not pulling it out of his collection, then at least he feels pricing it too low. And that when you can get one over on Albert, that's a good day. This is a Kurt Swan Superman page featuring Bizarro Superman. It's one of the few Bizarro Superman panel pages, let alone examples of Bizarro Superman, that I've actually ever seen from the sort of the Silver Age. I don't know what happened to those stories. I don't know if those were just things that got sent to fans and thrown out or broken up or whatnot, or just buried somewhere. But just not a lot of Bizarro exists. This one sort of had a double meaning for me. When I was a kid, I used to love, especially when I was away at summer camp, I used to love reading the DC Digest that did a lot of the reprints of the Silver Age Superman stuff. And so this is from the Superman's Day, where he's told that the letters LL will save his life, and he does a lot of thinking about Lana Lang and Lois Lane and all this stuff. And he ends up getting poisoned by Bizarro, who brings him a Superman Day gift of kryptonite, and a little leaguer named, I think, like Larry something or other saves his life. And so LL did save his life, but it was none of the women he thought it was going to be. And I'm a huge Kurt Swan fan. I love those stories. And then for those of you who know about my writing career, one of my favorite things I've ever written was the Bizarro Jerry episode of Seinfeld, which sort of, Jerry is a big Superman fan, both in the show and in real life. We introduced sort of talking about Bizarro Superman on the show, and created these characters who were sort of Jerry's opposite numbers and whatnot. And so for me, there was definitely the hunt of, I wanted a great Bizarro piece. And when I saw this page, I mean, talk about a panel page that both moves the story along, but also has everything you could want in it. Each panel is just really, really perfect in terms of their interactions, the action, the what's going on and whatnot. Yeah, it was just amazing. And I can remember being at an early San Diego, probably my second one I was ever at. So I had written the episode, and I was really wanting to find this piece. And I was wandering around from dealer to dealer to dealer. This would have probably been around 96 or so. Dealer to dealer to dealer. No one had any, but they kept sort of pointing me in directions. So they kind of pointed me to here, pointed me to here. And eventually someone pointed me to Richie Halegua, who no longer is a comic art dealer. But I think he was out of Vegas. And I went over, and sure enough, Richie Halegua had this one page. And even he said it's one of the few I've ever seen from the story, whatever. And it was really one of the first times, especially in my comic art career, where it was really like a hard negotiation with a guy that sort of had it up for sale but didn't really have a price, and didn't really want to sell it, and yet it was up on his on his wall. At least that's how I remember it. And but it was it was one of those things again. I had to have. And I've seen other pieces here and there over the years, but I've never seen a panel page that just did so much for me. I kind of had to have it, and like I said, it's all interconnected for me with also the Seinfeld stuff. So Kirby Fantastic Four cover, I think it speaks for itself. Kirby Crackle, these images of Fantastic Four were used everywhere in like Marvel stuff all throughout the 60s. But I was very lucky enough, and this is again many years ago, that one of the big old-time collectors was making a run at some really big piece. It needed to move a lot of stuff in a certain amount of time. You know, he wanted basically $100,000. And that's, again, at a time when obviously that's a real number, but that wasn't just one piece or half a piece. So it was an opportunity to buy, you know, 5 or 6 or even 7 at this point, you know, really great pieces. Some of the pieces that are the cornerstone of my collection were like this one. And I put a list together and I sort of, you know, made this work, and I sort of, you know, we went back and forth, and, you know, pieces would go in the deal and come out of the deal and whatever. We finally agreed to the deal, and I wrote him a check for $100,000, which at the time was the most money I'd ever spent on anything. You know, I hadn't even bought a house or anything like that. So it's real money. It's real money. And I write the check and I date the check, and I realize this deal has taken so long. It was April 1st. And so I wrote a check for $100,000 on April Fool's Day, which I don't know why I always found very amusing. This is one of the true, I don't know, I guess, prides and joy. This is one of the pieces that I never thought I would ever own. You know, you make lists of things you think you might own. This was not on any list. I was sort of stunned. This is the Spidey 28 cover by Steve Ditko, Spidey versus the Molten Man. I don't know if you can see in any of the pictures or the footage, but one of the really amazing things in it is, even though the piece is all black, he really fully drew Spider-Man. And so if you even though it's all black, you can see like the brushwork of the ink of the leg goes one way, but the background goes the other way. So even though they're the same color, you can feel the leg in a way that nowadays a lot of artists would just lay black down everywhere and not care. And there's just so much skill in there that just speaks to Ditko's skill. This was a fascinating piece because I acquired it from Marie Severin, who had it for many years. And she had been given it because she was doing Marvel Tales covers, and they were having her sort of ape various Ditko covers. And basically, you know, they were like, here, take this with you so you can figure it out. And, you know, she took it home with her so she could, you know, basically do her version of it. And years later, and I don't know, I like to think this was a good thing, she basically wanted to sell it so that she could get a new car and move into this retirement home and sort of change her life at the time. And, you know, they put at the time what was a, you know, a very hefty price tag on it. But I said yes immediately because it was sort of that, well, where am I going to ever find a Steve Ditko cover? And I don't know, I besides loving the piece, I had some satisfaction in knowing how happy she was and how she sort of changed a lot of her life with the deal. So I always thought that was kind of cool. So, but just a real favorite. This is an ad piece for the Uncanny XMen. It ran in Marvel Comics with the slogan, like the old X-Men, you'll love the new X-Men, still uncanny after all these years. It was a half-page ad piece, and then the art was also used, I believe, for a 7-Eleven cup where they added Nightcrawler into his sort of Banff smoke. The piece is by Dave Cockrum, and it is one of my earliest X-Men memories. When I first started reading the X-Men, I actually was reading the reprint books, which was, I think it was Amazing Adventures. I was rereading all the early X-Men, like X-Men's 1 through like 9 or so. And somewhere in there, right in the middle, around like 6 or 7, I came upon this ad piece, and I had no idea there was anything called the Uncanny X-Men. As far as I knew, because I don't think I even realized at first that I was reading reprints, the X-Men were, you know, this team with Professor Xavier in matching uniforms and all this stuff. And I saw this piece, and I was like, oh my God, there's, you know, this ad piece, and oh my God, there's this other book. And I ended up starting to pick up X-Men, and you know, I read X-Men for the next 20 odd years, and a lot of it is because of this piece. So this piece was on my mind from the moment I first got into comic art, I remembered the piece. Of course, unfortunately for me, I didn't really remember anything much else about it, and I, of course, didn't ever really like track it down in an old comic book, but I would talk about it a lot. Unfortunately, in my mind, I started to think it was burned. I think Austin inked it, so maybe that's part of the reason why, that he sort of, the Austin sheen on Cockrum led me to think it was burned. So I was constantly looking for this, what I thought was this burned piece, and no one ever was like, oh no, you're wrong, that's Cockrum. Most people either didn't remember it, didn't know what it was, or anything like that. So a couple of years go by, and I'm lucky enough to sort of make contact with Dave Cockrum's son, Ivan. And at the time, I guess Ivan was selling some stuff that Dave's ex-wife had. They had some art. And I was lucky enough to pick up some stuff from them, and we were talking a lot about, you know, covers and whatnot. And I guess I must have said something that led them to believe I was only interested in covers. And as I found out, even as I was talking to them about quote-unquote covers, he had this piece sitting there, but didn't think to mention it because quote-unquote it wasn't a cover. So I missed out on the piece, and it surfaced a couple of years later in a guy's collection on the Comic Art fan site. And I couldn't believe it. I saw it there. I couldn't believe it existed. I realized, oh my God, it's Dave Cockrum. You know, and I sort of, in talking to the guy, and he told me the story of how he got it from Ivan, the son, and when he did, and I realized, oh my God, I can't believe I missed out on it. And this piece is sitting there, and I, you know, every now and then I kind of would come back to him. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, like twice a year you write a letter, you know, January 1st and like, you know, July 1st, and you kind of go, sorry to bug you, you know, would you ever sell? He had no interest in selling. And then years later, and I do mean years later, because I kept reading X-Men. I mean, I read X-Men forever. I was like a, you know, a housewife with a soap opera. I read it way, way further than I ever should have. But I had a couple of really nice pieces by Frank Quitely from the Grant Morrison run, including for a couple of minutes I had the White Queen cover. That, if you remember that White Queen cover, that everyone sort of remembered her in the very skimpy outfit and whatnot. It was a really striking piece and really well done by Frank Quitely's real name is Vince. I just thought it was a piece he really knocked out of the park, and Marvel used it everywhere. And I put up a post of it on the Comic Art fan site, and the guy who owned this piece contacted me. Did I ever want to sell the Quitely? And I said, how about I give you the Quitely, and I threw a number at him for the X-Men. And he said, I can't do that. And I went, oh well. And about a day later, he got back to me and said, what about, and he bumped the number up by, I think it was $1,000. And I just said, absolutely, here's my FedEx number. I'm FedExing this. Let's get this going. And it was because it was literally like that morning, and I was like, I want the piece by tomorrow, and you'll have my check and whatnot. Because I knew if this guy had a minute to think about it, it was going to be bad for me. And we did the deal, and he sent it to me. I sent him the other piece and the check and whatever, and he cashed the check. And about a week or two later, maybe it was about 2 weeks later, I got the email, would I like to undo the deal? He kind of regrets it. And I said, look, man, I feel really sorry. I'm sorry you regret it. You know, it's been a couple of weeks now. I think I'm pretty happy here, but I'll let you know if I'm ever letting go of it. But, you know, that's one they can bury me with as far as I'm concerned.